Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thank You Five, show brought to you by Strawdog Theater, where we talk theater not only in the city of Chicago but around the world. Every week we bring in a few guests from all over, and we just talk shop. We talk theater, what it means to us, what's going on in it, and every little bit of information or opinion that we can, especially in this crazy digital age. Tonight, April 12th. I'm Johnard, Washington. I'll be your host. If you don't know me, I've been in Chicago for the past 12 years as an actor. I am an ensemble member of Strawdog Theater and the Bramble Theater Ensemble, represented by Stewart Talent. Got to give those guys a thumbs up. And yeah, I love talking theater. I love being here, and I'm very excited to meet these guys. Darren, who are you?
I'm Darren Michael. I'm a professor of theater, acting, directing, playwriting at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. Let's go P. Was not a joke. And I've been here about 16 years, professional actor, director for many years. In the past, probably 15, 16 years, mostly writing.
Awesome.
I'll pass it to Emily.
Unmute myself. Hi, I'm Emily McConnell. I am a costume designer here in Chicago. I spend most of my time as the resident costume designer for Roosevelt University, Chicago College of Performing Arts Theater Conservatory. And I've been there for about 15 years. And I'm also an ensemble member of Steep Theater here in Chicago. And that is how I spend the majority of my time in the world of theater. I will shoot it to Lita.
Hey, hi, I'm Lita. I'm coming to you from Columbus, Ohio, where I am the artistic director at CATCO, the Contemporary American Theater Company. I've been in this role about 3 years, and just before that, I was artistic director at Strawdog. So near and dear to my heart, happy to be hanging out with some Strawdog folks again tonight.
And I'm Brian Hill in Chicago, Illinois. I have just returned from Los Angeles, where I was a casting associate for Gail Pillsbury Casting and Zane Pillsbury Casting. Worked on Pretty Little Liars, The Purge season 2, like a lot of pilots that never saw the light of day. And before that, I was the artistic director of Visions and Voices Theater Company, a theater company here in Chicago devoted to new work. We did 6 productions in about 4 years. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about theater, but I'm sure I'll get into that with everybody here this evening. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm really glad that, today we have, Lita, even though you've been here in Chicago, but we have more people from different parts of the city. It's really great to get opinion, or from the country, not the city. It's good to get opinions from all over the world, just to kind of get a feel on what is happening. And that first question, we've all had a little bit of time. What is theater? So I guess I'll start. I try to do something different every week. And I really hadn't thought about it today, but I think for me today, theater is a collective. Theater is an event where people, both participants and audience members, find themselves or their place in a story. And that is, that starts as early as the rehearsal process. I would even say casting, someone finding a place in the story. You deepen that in a rehearsal process. You share that with your cast members. You invite an audience to be a part of it, and either they will agree with it, relate to someone in it, relate to ideas in it, or they will completely remove themselves from it, and sometimes remove themselves from the theater. And I think it's that collective experience in a story where you find yourself in some way involved or uninvolved, if that makes sense. Brian.
Thanks, Johnard. I was thinking about this question this evening, and I have a very, like I said in my intro, I have a lot of mixed emotions about theater. It is that lover, who you give and you never get back enough. The clean answer is it is the collective experience of people coming together to share and tell stories. And I think a lot of people, when they're involved in the theater, it becomes set in stone in a kind of, even the more kind of experimental ways of doing theater, it's still set in stone in this type of environment, this kind of place. The theater is a place that we go to. And I feel like as I get older, the religious tales, that are at the heart of so much of our earliest storytelling, like the theater experience is rooted in the spiritual and the religious. And I think it is a kind of, regardless of the topic of the play or of the text, it is a communion with the divine, right? And so that's what makes theater so powerful as a collective experience, is that, you can have a powerful experience in a movie. I saw Tree of Life and had an incredible experience that I've never experienced in any other venue ever. But the experiences that I've had in theater, in that close contact to the performers, the energy. And I think all of us as artisans have been involved in those productions where the stars align, right? And everything is right. Everybody's hitting their marks. The audience is great. You're backstage, you're going, oh my God. And that's the dragon that we after that, and the production after that, it's like it's a hint of, I remember that feeling, and that's what I'm chasing. And that, I think, is definitely connected to the divine, and the audience is definitely a part of that. So
that's awesome. Darren, would you like to share?
Sure. You guys are hitting on all my notes. For me, theater is, we've talked about it, I believe it's alive, it's community, it's storytelling. You guys hit on those three. The thing that I constantly tell audiences and students and fans of theater alike is that the reason we're different than other things is that we're a live community storytelling experience. And that's what separates itself from all the other things. I think, without going too far with it, it's a really exciting time in theater, which we might get to. It's also a pretty challenging time. But what I always go back to is people in a room together, strangers or friends, experiencing a story together.
Awesome. Emily?
There we go. Sorry, close my window for a second. You all, again, you hit some of the things that I've been thinking of. Certainly for me, it really goes back to storytelling always, and that exchange between audience and actor that I think makes it so different. So I'll just add a couple of things to those. I have been thinking a lot lately about how theater relates to time and the different ways in which time is experienced in theater. And one of those is especially the repetitive, or like the fancy word, iterative nature of theater, right? The fact that we do it for the most part over and over and over again, right? There's very few theatrical performances that happen one time. And even if they do, you've rehearsed them multiple times, right? So with the exception of maybe like the 24-hour kind of play experience, almost always there's an experience of we have done this multiple times together, and each time is somehow different. And I think that's particularly special about theater, and certainly from the design perspective, as somebody who's not necessarily in that, on that stage doing the show over and over again, the unique thing about working in theater for me is that at some point the show has to open, right? Like at some point my work has to be done. I have to put it out there on stage. I can't just keep working on it, as opposed to a lot of other art forms where I could keep tinkering. The show's done, like it's open, it has to be done. And that is, so that's something I've been lately.
Awesome. And Lita, if you have anything to share.
Community, just what theater at its best can do is bring people together in a shared story. And I love what you started with, right? Me. And sometimes we walk out of the room because it is so not for us at that moment in time. But there's something about being in that moment together. Emily, what you were just saying about time, my theater has contemporary in its name. So I'm like rolling around all the time what a contemporary theater is. And to me, like kind of all theater is contemporary, that we are forced to be of this moment. Even if we are trying to do a recreation of the way someone did the play in the past, we can't turn on the movie that was made 40 years ago, right? We have to make it now. And so there's something about theater in the way that it forces you to be inherently local to a specific location of where we are making and sharing that theater, unless you can figure out how to share that theater virtually, right? Your time bound. It is happening in this moment. We are sharing this experience at this exact time. And most theater goes away and you don't get to see it after closing. And there's something really important and magical about that thing that is for this moment. Speaking for this moment, I know I talked to lots of playwrights who go, I wrote this play, it had its moment, and probably we won't do this play ever again. And that's thrilling to me that you can be thinking about an exact moment in time and what a group of people in a specific location in a specific moment need to hear and come together to think about.
Yeah, can I say something both to Emily and Alita about this? Because the time thing is, I give this example, and I've completely stolen this from the wonderful playwright Doug Wright. I was in a session with him several years ago, but I tell people that this is different than anything else. You're sitting in a room with people, and he gives this analogy about the difference between theater and film, but I think it's this idea of time, like time just sitting together, but how we can move places. And he talks about if you're watching a movie and there's a placard and it says Poland 1945, then the next image you see better look like Poland in your head 1945. But in theater, all you need is a blank stage and for someone to walk across with a piece of paper that says Poland 1945, and guess what? Everybody in that room is suddenly in Poland 1945. You don't need anything else. And I tell people all the time, it's like, that's kind of the cool thing about the time that we exist together, that we're here from lights up to lights down, we go away, you're right. But within that amount of time, we're kind of everywhere. We're everywhere, anywhere, but we're present. And I tell people, I was like, that's what's different for people who haven't seen theater or people who see good theater and it kind of sits in their head. The idea of present tense is so important, and it's present tense for the community, but the magic of it is we can kind of go anywhere.
Yeah, and there's something about the present tense and just the presence of other actors or audience members that's absolutely different than watching a film or the thing that stuck out to me with time was Emily saying, and I'm glad you did say it, was as an actor it is extremely different and senses are so heightened, like if the other actor is missing their mark, if the other actor is on, and an audience member may not know what that whole timeline is like, but they're getting something. They do sense the electricity between those performers, or they can feel the magic that's happening, or that difference. they may perceive it as like, this is my show, the one that I saw. But it's I think that is sort of the magic, or the I forget which word you use, Brian, the alchemy of being in a theater.
And just if I could
Yeah,
piggyback
go
on
for it.
that, I mean, I
Don't be
think
polite,
too,
Brian.
and think about, oh, I need to raise my hand. Think about like being in a movie theater, right? You have the screen, you're being inundated with the visual and the sound system, but because of that, you're constantly aware of your surroundings, of being in the plush chair and the AC's too low and it's too cold and my popcorn's running. I got to go to the bath, all of these things. And not to say that that's not possible, but in the theater, in a circumstance where it is a approximation of a reality in the form of the setting and all of that, the costuming, all of those elements, the lighting. I have experienced as an audience member being lost in the story and just being completely focused and engaged. And I'm not psychotic. I'm aware of my surroundings, you know what I mean? But it because it's so immediate, I'm transported. I go along with the story. I'm actively engaged in watching the characters, the interplay, right? And that involvement is like something that movies simply can't deliver, as much as they have IMAX and, there's spectacle there. And that's fantastic. We go to the movies for spectacle, I think. I think where theater falls down is when they try to match spectacle, is when it's like the illusion is like obvious. You know what I mean? And the most obvious, and people I doubt would even remember, but Spider-Man the musical. It's like, why are you doing Spider-Man on the stage when they're doing it on the movie? They're going to do it better. You know what I mean? It's like, let us not compete with those elements that we cannot compete against. Let us enhance and use those elements that are our strength, that draw in and engage the audience in a meaningful way.
I typically find that like there's something about like black box theater or just smaller theaters that completely draw me in. Not in a claustrophobic way or anything, but and not that it can't be done in a big house, because I've mentioned it before, but August Osage County, they hit the back of the theaters with the work that they've done. But there's something about an intimate space where it just feels like we're all in this together, that's just like unbelievable to me. I say that because I remember in college having to read a New York Times article about Spider-Man the musical, and what a travesty it was. People just getting injured, and just basically the article was like, why are we doing this? But yeah, I don't know why I threw that in, but I'm gonna move to this question from Sam, if that's okay with anybody. Okay, cool. What's one indelible moment you can remember from any storefront production that you've been a part of? It says Chicago, but not all of you live here, so just fill us in on that moment, and that would be Emily.
So I thought of this because of the sort of time conversation. I have a really clear memory of a neo-futurists production that it was part of their regular show, which at the time was still called Too Much Light Makes the Baby Go Blind. And for those of you who aren't here, or anybody who doesn't know, the neo-futurist actually is a company that strives to tear away most of like the artifice of theater, and they're very insistent that like we are ourselves putting on these plays, everything we're saying is true, right? Things like that. I am not a neo-futurist, so I'm not going to be explaining it super well. But the idea was that in Too Much Light at the time, they had all written these very short plays, maybe like 2 minutes long, and the audience chose the order every night, and it was random. And there's a timer at the back because the show can only be 60 minutes long. And this particular night, I don't remember at what point in the order we chose this play, but someone in the show was about to leave Chicago and had been in the neo-futurist for a long time. And somebody else in the show had written a play about not wanting them to leave. And so in the play, this 2-minute play, the point was that she was trying to get to the timer to set it back, and he was trying to stop her from getting to it. And it was just this like really incredibly touching thing where it was like this game and everything was very silly, but it was also just incredibly true and incredibly moving. And I mean, this was like 10 years ago, and I am so clear about like what was happening then and what we were watching happen. So that I thought that was a really beautiful way of like manipulating the rules they had already set up, and then also telling this really true story about their actual relationship and what people were really going through at the time. So that's the thing that popped into my head.
That is awesome. That sounds really emotional.
It was amazing.
Darren, you had a moment?
Yeah. I thought about this earlier, that, you know, I actually don't think I've seen a show in Chicago other than a tour several years ago. But the thing that always hits me was when I first got into playwriting in Nashville, there was a now defunct theater called Playhouse Nashville. I remember the guys that were involved in that, who brought me in and ultimately turned me into a playwright. I blame them for that. But I remember they started this thing when we were producing material, and they did the what is it, the hospitality thing where you don't pay, right? You pay afterwards, right? And they were only doing new works. They wouldn't do anything traditional. And when they first started, I remember like 5-10 people in the house each night. And but then the next night, because we would do 4 events a year, and by about the third one, the house started to pack. And I thought, this is weird. And just suddenly people were, I noticed in Nashville at the time, and it's still at this way, I think, that people suddenly really loved new work, love to be involved with new work, right? You know, Nashville has a great reputation for Broadway tours and professional companies and things like that. But what was amazing to me is very quickly, we had 200-300 people, patrons that were there every night because they just couldn't get enough of the play process, the theater process. Because what we'd do is we would produce a bunch of 10-minute plays, and then after every 3, we would bring the playwrights out, and the audience got to talk to them about the plays, give them feedback, learn the process, and so quickly. And then suddenly from that audience, the next time we did a call for new plays, there would be some of those people writing. And that's probably the thing that sticks out to me most. And the reason I got into it was you realize that people suddenly, theater provided them something, first of all, they didn't know they wanted. And then very quickly, not only did they want it, they realized it's something they couldn't do without then. And that they became writers, and they became part of the process. It was really exciting time about 10-12 years ago here when that was going on. So
Lita?
Yeah, as we were talking, like, oh, I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about the other thing. To jump off what Emily was talking about with back to this time theme, I was thinking about All Are Tragic at Hypocrites, and like just the sheer number of people involved in this epic day of theater. For those of you who didn't get to see it or hear about it, it literally, I think, took 12 hours, and we had some dinner breaks and things to go outside and see the sunlight. But the experience of going through adaptations of every single Greek tragedy we know exist in a 12-hour time period with a collective group of people was just like this mind-blowing moment of what theater could be and what this collective meant and what time meant, and all the individual artists working on that production at this level of detail that like had to be done to do just that sheer amount of storytelling was really incredible. And then Darren, thinking about what you were saying, like I was like, that is also a new work, right? It was based in Greek tragedies, but my greatest moments in Chicago storefront theater have been new work, have been plays I didn't know anything about when I walked in the door. I think about like At the Table or United 232, or like these moments when we didn't know what we were going to see and we walked in and then we saw something that we connected with for whatever reason. And Darren, I'm also living in a community where the Broadway tours are the thing, and the newer work has a smaller number of people who know they want it. And we just, at Catco, we just closed a production of But You Could Have Held My Hand by Jacoby Johnson. He's based in the Twin Cities. It's amazing young playwright, and his work was just resonating with so many people who were coming out of this theater. And I think it's just so exciting that storefront, by its very nature, by its very size, allows us to take risk on things. Right, allows people to walk into a room and experience something they hadn't heard of, that didn't have a huge marketing budget behind it, and just say, I don't know, what's this play going to be about, and take me on a journey. And maybe that journey will be the journey I needed this moment, or maybe it'll be a journey I'll, honestly forget in a few years, whatever. Like, we just start looking for that elusive, like Brian, you were saying, that elusive moment as audience members too, of feeling that just unity with other people around an idea or a thing that we need to hang on to.
Yeah, Brian.
As part of this, just not even knowing this question was being asked, I did a deep dive, because there's a production that I saw that Red Orchid did in the early aughts, and I wasn't even sure of the time frame, that I could never remember the name of. And so I did a deep dive this evening, and I finally found it. And so and I, when I've done workshops in LA, I talk about theater, I talk about this experience that I had, and it was Gagarin Way that Red Orchid did, and it was Michael Shannon. And like, I didn't know who Michael Shannon really was at that point. I just didn't. I mean, but I will tell you that production, like the palpable sense of danger that was present by his presence and his relationship to the audience and the text, was something that was so electric. Like, I still remember, like, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. And I went with a friend of mine, and a Chicago actress, and she knew him from previous production. She had been around a little bit longer than me. And, even then he had that reputation, that kind of like really like inward, like, don't F with him. I mean, I think that he's kind of like fostered and just, he kind of enjoys. But like, even after the show, it's just like, that is a person I don't, hey, great show. But I like, that's the extent of it. Like, that's how dangerous he felt. And it was like nothing that I had ever experienced in theater before. And it was remarkable. And that space, I don't know if they're in the same space, but that basement space in Old Town, like, it's so close. It's just, yeah, it was tough.
I have like a few examples. Like, there's a couple of Matt Foss productions that I've seen, like The Jungle, and then
Yes.
more recently, All Quiet on the Western Front. Unbelievable productions, just especially since there's a lot of blood in both stories. Chicago Stockyards, like World War, and just like blood being like glitter or like paint. But I guess maybe because you're here, Emily, I was in a production, and I'm not giving myself any kudos on this. I was in the extension of the Harriet, directed by Monty Cole. And it was different. It was an all-black cast. The way we worked was the choreography, like stomp choreography of Brianna Erzell. And at the very end, the titular character played by Julian Parker dies, and like, you know, going back to like we've rehearsed this, we all know what happens, but there's something about like, and you know, I've done tech, but there's something about Julian Parker who dies on a grid, and lights are coming down, and everything is like black and white, and then you see like puddles of blood, where like even as an actor in it, you're just like, oh my God, and you feel the rush of the audience just being like, that's it. This like hero is over. And I just remember actually having that feeling more than, you know, I would assume that, you know, there's something about the lights and the blood and you know, him just lying there lifeless, where like it'll happen once, but there's several moments where I was just like, fuck, like you got me again. You got me again, and I know exactly what's gonna happen. It's there was just something about the lighting element and the pool of blood and just like his muscles, like the shadows, and just, I don't know, it was absolutely incredible. And I was very happy to be a part of that.
I love there are moments like that where like the design team, like I mean, obviously I wasn't in that tech, so I don't know, but I can just imagine that like that's this incredibly intense, like everyone's reaction in the actual show is supposed to be like, and you know, you just know that in tech, the entire design team is like, yes,
Yeah.
we did it. Like it's just like that's the coolest, cutest thing I've ever seen.
And you also probably know that,
and
and
that's
you
what
probably,
you're going for.
as someone who has like been in tech, you also know that it probably took half a day to do
So
that.
long. Yeah.
I'm going to move it on to this next question. What are the challenges that are most pressing for you as an individual artist within the community at large that has its own challenges? Brian.
It is the age-old challenge of balancing commerce and art.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, before the pandemic, I think that there was a choice, right? You were either a daytime worker who did theater at night, or you were a nighttime worker, you know, doing restaurants or bartending or whatever, so that you could do daytime auditions. So maybe now that so much is self-tape, like nobody's really going into the room anymore. You know, maybe that's changed and people are remote working. Maybe there's, you know, more of a balance than there used to be. But oftentimes, maybe, and maybe not. I mean, you know, I think that, you know, the thing when I would do workshops in LA, you know, I would tell actors in the room, you know, like, but this is what you signed up for. You know what I mean? Like you're not an accountant. You're not a lawyer. You're not guaranteed anything because you live in a country that generally doesn't support the arts. In fact, kind of piggybacking on what somebody else said, you know, Darren, I think you were talking about like people, like they wanted, you know, by and large though, theater is a product that people don't think they need or want. And they have a million other conflicting things like vying for their attention. So it's like, how then do you get an audience, frankly? You know what I mean? And that's, I'm going off on a tangent there, but yeah, the challenge I think of any artist, whether it's an actor or a designer or, you know, I mean, the day jobs, you know, the artistic jobs just aren't as plentiful. We know the statistics from the unions, you know what I mean? And so doing the thing for its own sake is kind of a tough pill to swallow sometimes, but like, that's the gig, I think. So it's commerce. It's the tension of commerce and art that I think we all experience.
Oh my God, there's a King John monologue or Philip the Bastard, commodity, he who wins of all, of kings, of beggars. Yes, you're right. Emily, what's
So this kind of connects to that. It's not exactly the same. It's sort of like a Venn diagram of the two, right? Because the thing I have been thinking about a lot, especially in this last year, as sort of we've come back out of pandemic shutdowns, is where people find their own value. And I think pre-pandemic, the sort of going idea in the world of theater was that your value was in your work, right? Those two things were the same. And you weren't valuable as a theater artist if you weren't doing the work, if you weren't producing work, if you weren't involved in the work, etc. And then shutdowns happened and there was no work. And depending on what you were able to do with Zoom shows or other things, many theater artists, myself included, had to figure out like, well, what am I doing? What am I worth if I'm not getting to do my work, right? I had like complete meltdowns over like, but I'm not doing the thing in which I am my best self. Like, what do I do now? And over that like year and a half to 2 years, I think a lot of people figured out ways to define their value that was not based in the work. And so then as the work started to come back, and people were like, well, come back and do this for nothing, because you're only valuable in the work. And we were like, actually, I've figured out something totally different. So now you're going to have to pay me what I have figured out that I am worth. And that is real tricky. And I think a lot of people, there's a lot of tension there between people asking for equitable compensation, equitable support in some way, and theaters being like, but we've never done that before. We don't know how to do that. And also there's only so many resources, right? It's not like people are actively going like, we don't want to pay anybody. But it's a real like shifting of the model that I think is ongoing and will go on for a little while until we find some new equilibrium, whether or not that's an equitable equilibrium or more equitable equilibrium than we had, I don't know. But I think that's a really interesting process that I'm watching play out as we all come back to more and more live productions.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I have so much to say on that, but Darren, I'll be polite. I know you were next.
Well, you can go ahead and I'll answer afterwards, or which
You know what? Yes, I'm gonna be rude. So my biggest issue with this is it's that post-pandemic like existential residual like blah, where I was taught prior to the pandemic that if you accept a production, it is either there's a pyramid and you can only have two of the three, very rarely. And it's you choose it for the people, the production, the show, or the money. Never all three, not never, but like very rarely. And there's something about this pandemic where where prior to that I was like I'll accept anything and everything, I'll just keep working, I'll keep doing this, and after the pandemic I was like, no, I'm not going to say yes to anything and everything. There's specific things that I want to be seen doing, but you come out of the pandemic and there's new theaters, there's new work, and certainly new actors who are just like, I'm willing to do that. And I feel irrelevant, or not irrelevant. I just feel, taking a few notches down because I don't feel as much of a yes man as I was prior. And how am I an artist if I'm not working? You know what I mean? If I'm not telling someone's story, do I want, to be at my 9 to 5 job more? I say yes to them. Why not say yes to a show, even if, one of the pillars that I've accepted isn't something that I absolutely agree with or I'm willing to spend my time with. Um, and you know, that's the insanity of it. You know, I don't pray at night for this misery. I'm an actor because those are the cards that were dealt to me. And that is, the pandemic also has taught me that that is not the only time that I feel the most alive. So I won't tell you that lie. Life has showed me that I get things from that, but that add to a performance. But uh, all I all I all I can do, all I want to do is act. Um, and it sucks that it's not my job to, or is it to like put all these things in order to make things equitable, to have only the best of stories, to have the productions be always of quality, for the sake of theater. That's what sucks. That's my challenge. um Thanks for giving me that, Darren. What you got to say?
Well, all that I'm there with you. Thinking back on the original question, I think about the two things. I'm an educator first right now. It's my 9 to 5, but the two things I often struggle with when I'm talking to students, my colleagues, my art, my theater friends. One is audience, and one has to do with artists. Kind of like with Emily, you and Johnard had said that we have students at a college level that are paying a lot of money to come here, right? And so back to that commerce thing, I think about all the time about we have call it a theater degree, but really what we're trying to do is like, look, theater is what you might love, but it's not going to pay your bills for the most part, right? We have students who are working in the film industry and voiceover and audio, but I mean, years ago there was, I think Ben Cameron did the thing about the democratization of the art right now, that he said in his argument, there's no better time to be a performer because there's so many ways to commoditize what you do. But that's not theater, right? It's something else. And so, I struggle with that because I do believe theater is such a powerful entity thing that we do, but it would be unethical for me to talk about, I'm not just training a theater artist. I think that would just be unethical for me to do. It's just not what we do in our world anymore. I train you in the theater, but the fact of the matter is, in our program, we train you to do a lot of things. Most of our students, we only have 1 or 2 that are actually doing specifically just primarily theater. Most of them are film in Atlanta. Nashville's got a film and music video. We've got dancers, we've got choreographers, we've got a lot of other things that people do. A couple of our students just moved to Chicago, doing the improv stuff. So things like that, right? So I struggle with that, where we fit as an educator. What am I doing with my students who are paying such a large amount of money that, frankly, I tell them that they don't really need to be an actor. One of my chair of my department says all the time, don't tell them that. I was like, well, look, I tell them, like, you come to college because you feel like you need more. You don't really need this. You can go off to and the students who, the freshman year have attitudes and don't want to be here. I was like, what are you doing in school? You're spending way too much money. Get out of here. Go do something else. You come to school because you feel like I got to learn a little more before I get out there. And does this program prepare me for that? So I struggle with that. The second thing is, I really struggle with this about audiences, about, I think there are a couple of things about audience. They want them. But I think overall, nationally, the idea of theater appears to most people as kind of an elitist thing. And I struggle with it. Ticket prices are out the wazoo, especially down here in Tennessee. Nashville ticket prices for the best shows are way too expensive. Even our local theater here charges too much. Our local professional, I tell them all the time, I was on the board for years. It's like, your prices are way too high. if you want to grow your audiences. And so this is what happens, that people, especially in the South or non-theater cities, tend to look at it as kind of elitist, right? I can't afford to do it. Just to do a Broadway tour, if you're taking 4 people, you're shelling out several $100s to go see that. But just to do local stuff, you're still spending the same amount of money for those tickets. So I really want theater to be more integrated into where I live and these areas, but it's tough because it costs a lot to produce theater. And so I don't know, one of the things I try to figure out is how we can make it more accessible, because I think it speaks most, and it's written about, and the stories that are told are about people who often can't see the material. The working class.
Can you say that again?
I said it's often written about, the stories we tell in theater are often for the people who can't afford to get there and see them, right? That the military, the disenfranchised voices of our community. A lot of the stuff we write about, we're a military town, really, and I've written a couple of pieces. And one of the things is if I can get them in the room, a lot of the military have been our best audience members, but they admit, they don't have a lot of money. And so, we do college theater, and I think we do pretty good college theater, but they can't go to a lot of these professional theaters. They just can't afford them. And that's a thing I really struggle with, about how do we, how do we make it more accessible in a way? Anyway, I've taken a lot of time, but those are the 2 things I struggle with.
Oh, we love it, man.
And if I could just jump just real quick, and I think, and I was talking to Kyle about this today, is I think part of the problem is that theaters have been very precious about how they promote themselves for a very long time. And this also goes back to the original model for like regional theater. You know what I mean? Like the Ford Foundation, influx of cash into Houston and Minneapolis, like all of these hubs for regional theater that created these places where people didn't have to go to LA. They didn't have to go to New York. They could have a quality of life. I mean, Donovan Marley came from California and took over Denver Center Theater Company and brought a lot of his company members to Denver Center, and the rep company, like those folks, like were able to make a living. They also were able to do TV here and there because Perry Mason was, but that model for regional theater is like, doesn't work anymore. The monologuist Mike Daisy is a kind of a controversial figure, but he's basically talked extensively about how regional theater is failing the performer. The folks that are doing really well in regional theaters are artistic directors, executive, and I'm talking about the big regional houses, right? The executive directors, the artistic directors, directors of development. They've got teams of development people who are scouring the land and grabbing, and those bodies that give money, well, I mean, it's a prestige thing to give to Steppenwolf and to Goodman. It is less prestigious to give to Strawdog. That is a fact for them. You know what I mean? And so yeah, I mean, like, and to Darren's point, yeah, I mean, it's incredibly expensive for a storefront theater to produce in a storefront theater. Even that, I mean, just renting a space is like prohibitively expensive. So I think we have to and also too, with the demise of the printed word, you know what I mean? It's like the storefront theater, like, okay, we do postcards, we do a handful of posters, but we were really counting on the newspapers coming in and getting us that great review in the Sun-Times and the Tribune. And then it's like, in most places, like, never mind one newspaper, like now you've got, like, even in television and film, like, look at reviews for movies and TV, like The Collider. What the F is The Collider? You know what I mean? But they are like prominently featured as like a review entity. You know what I mean? And so all of these methods of promoting theater companies that we all did for the last 20 or 30 years are like, they're archaic. And then during the pandemic, you have Actors Equity and SAG like fighting amongst themselves about whether you can stream plays or not. It's like, oh my gosh, can we get out of our way like once so that we can like give people you know what I mean? It's like there's this territorial pissing match that's just like maddening. And it's like, you know, I don't say this lightly, when I've done workshops and, you know, and I talk about scene study classes being a preparation for theater, I always follow that lineup with womp womp. And if you don't think, I mean, and theater's been in this constant state of crisis, but if you don't think that it has the potential to go away entirely, again, I'll reference the newspaper business. They didn't get on board with online until it was too effing late. You know, I'm sorry, I get real.
Yeah, there is no local paper here in Clarksville anymore. And when I first moved here, it was a very big one. But very quickly, within the last 3 to 5 years, Nashville has bought out all the community theaters in Middle Tennessee. They produce all the news, all the newspaper reports, all the reporting, everything for the entire Middle Tennessee.
What were you going to say, Lita?
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say, you know, as I've been listening, I think like this original question about the individual artist is a part of a community, and there being challenges with, right, both within ourselves as individuals and both within the larger community, the whole community of our country, and then an institution as a theater, and the funding streams and the newspapers and all of these things. And just today I saw an email on this group thread from somebody who was dealing with like some really big problems at their theater company, and was saying, you know, like, who am I without this theater? And what's right, and is my identity my job, and are things my fault, right? Am I solely responsible for fixing it? And we're not going to fix anything if no one thinks they're responsible for fixing the problem. Every institution, every problem is made up of individuals. But I think that when we feel like we are alone in that, that's when we can get really, really bogged down. And I think we have to remember that every community problem is made up of a collection of individuals. Every organization, every institution, everything that we're butting up against in the ways that we want to make theater, it's all based in people. And that when those individuals can stand up for themselves and dream big and be brave and make big solutions, that we have a chance to solve some really big picture community issues by just remembering that, like, we've got to boil this down to individuals, and individuals finding like-minded people who can help solve problems collectively.
And I think just, so, you know, the writers union, WGA, is on the path to striking this summer. Mm-hmm. And basically, you can't make a living anymore, like even as a well-established actor, because of the structure of episodes, of seasons, right? You don't have a 22 season order so much anymore. It's 10 and 13 episode seasons. And let me proffer this. If the studios and networks weren't making the same amount of money doing 10 and 13 episode seasons as they were doing 22, guess what? They're making the same amount of money, right? But who's getting squeezed? Actors, for sure. The technicians, the under the line people are getting squeezed. And I think that the thing I wish people would do in the unions is WGA, DGA, SAG, like collectively strike together, right? There's not enough cooperation between the organizations for that to happen. But that's the only way that something positive is going to come out of that whole negotiation process. In the same way, I know that there's the League of Chicago Theaters, but I wish there was more. I think when I was doing it in the early aughts, there was a little bit of territorialism between theater companies. And I wish there was more cooperation. We did a show at Strawdog, Vintage Red and the Dust of the Road. There was a great success for us, but so there was that. Then I was friends with the AD over at About Face, and then also Red Orchid. And this was around Christmas time. And it's like, hey, why don't we buy ad space? Let's buy a quarter ad space and promote all 3 of our shows. Individually, there's no way we could have afforded that in the Tribune, even with the League of Chicago Theater rates. But 3 companies having equal space on a quarter page ad, well, that's doable. And that's the kind of thing that I think we should be looking into, right? Together, we are stronger. in our separate camps, like trying to hoard our audience, it's like, that does no one any good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like that is, to some degree, there's a lot of that has come out of the pandemic. Like the amount of like, and this is beyond just theater, but like the amount of like unionization and like labor organizing that's happening in like faculties, right? Like
Yeah.
places that, you know, like, yes, you've got like Starbucks workers unionizing, and then also like graduate students. Like that's amazing to me, right? That I mean, I remember like 5 years ago, people would be like, unions are dead, right? And so that sense of like I'm also fascinated by this sort of like individualism versus collectivism. And I think it's so interesting that like there's this little bit of a sort of swoosh over towards like pendulum swing over towards like, actually, if we all get together, you know, we can make a lot of changes. I know just like within Chicago, like costume designers, because we have the same kind of problem that Johnard was referring to about, you know, not saying yes to projects that don't serve you entirely. We were all kind of struggling with the problem of like not getting equitable labor support, not getting like reasonable pay, etc. And we were always struggling with the problem of like, but then someone is going to come along and say yes to that super low fee, or say yes to doing that show with no support. And so what do you do if you want to like remain competitive as a designer in Chicago? And so the union did a big drive and cut down their admission fees significantly. A whole bunch of us joined the union, a whole bunch of non-union people joined up with the union people to say like, we're going to make organizing structures, we're going to create things like on our team, we're going to put, you know, like community organizing together to make it clear to the larger producing community what it is that we need and what we're asking for and what our standards are. And it was kind of amazing. And that was pre-pandemic, and it's just sort of continued and spread. But I think there is a big push for more and more people to join up. And especially for, I'm seeing theaters in different parts of the city say like, if I want to expand my audience, I'm going to actually support this theater that's where that audience is.
Mhm.
Where I think pre-pandemic, the assumption would be, well, I'm just going to poach their audience.
Yeah.
And I am really excited about that. It ties into a whole lot of like Black Lives Matter and We See You White American Theater stuff, but I'm glad that people are actually hearing it and going like, oh, we should like lean more over towards like assisting the people doing the work there, as opposed to we'll pretend like we can do that work ourselves. So that was kind of rambling, but I'm excited about all those things.
No, wait.
Oh, sorry, John. The only thing I want to say real quick, it's like when I talked about Chicago, when I was in LA, and I haven't been actively involved in the Chicago theater scene in almost 20 years, but without a doubt, I still know, and this is not a Homer thing that I'm saying, Chicago is the most vibrant theater scene, like on the planet, period. Not to take anything away from Nashville or any other regional spots, but in terms of like the large kind of city, and compared to New York has its own challenges, its own thing or whatever, but it doesn't hold a candle to the work that gets done here, because even with all the Chicago shows and the kind of budding infrastructure in terms of television and film, you come to Chicago to do the work. You go to New York, you go to LA for the brass ring. That's what you're chasing. You come here to be a part of just the work and being a blue collar. I mean, that's the thing about this community that I just found so remarkable, how elegant the ideas are. And it's still like this blue collar mentality. And when the work is done, at the end of the night, it's like, let's go drink, let's go do the thing. You know what I mean?
Yes. Okay, so we're already over, but we're gonna take some time. We're gonna take some time, if that's cool, to answer Hank's question, who's watching us live. You mentioned chasing a dragon and the theater's connection to religion. I think this is you, Brian. People leave, people stop, but can you ever shake the dragon? Can you get theater out of your system?
Lita, you go first because I've been talking too much.
Yeah. Well, so I'll say, like, you got to figure out that question for yourself. And I think that, like, sometimes we get stuck in this binary of I've got to quit theater forever because I got to break up with this toxic thing in my life, or I have to give up everything in my life to do theater. And I feel like I've personally been stuck in that binary before. And it's all a spectrum. And I think, like, you get to make a choice on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a season basis, and you get to figure out what it is you need. Like, we all, right, that thing we're talking about, it's incredible. We want it so badly. And every time someone makes us an offer, pitches us a play, talks to us about a thing we could do together, we wonder, is that this magic dragon, right? That spiritual feeling that we want, and it's going to fuel us forever. And I think we've a lot of us have gotten a little bit better in the pandemic times of figuring out, like Emily, you were saying, other parts of life, other things that matter, so that you can ask that question better. Is this the one? And if you know what, you passed on the thing that actually might be the one, it's going to be okay. There might be other ones. Like, I just think I'm not taking my own advice ever, just to be perfectly honest, but I'm trying to say to myself over and over that it's okay. Like, these moments come and go, and the magic of theater is that it is fleeting. And you get to catch the thing when it's right for you in your life. In that moment of time, and go do it. And then don't do it when it's not right for you, and it's going to be okay.
I'm going to go to Emily, and then we'll go to you, Brian.
So a couple of years ago, I updated my official CV, right? Like this sort of full list of all the things. And I had been struggling at the time with, like, feeling like I was kind of stuck. I'd been in the same university job for a really long time. The nature of my university job is I can say to professional theaters, I would love to design for you between April and August. Like, those were the only options. And it really limits what I can do. And, but I made the list, and it was something like over 100 shows, and, like, pretty consistently. I mean, it included, like, the university gig, which is a lot of shows, but it was, like, consistent working for, like, 20 years. And I was like, I think I'm a successful designer, y'all. Like, I never thought of myself that way. And because I think for a long time, I was taking what people sort of told me about what it meant to be successful in theater. And it meant, like, I was supposed to win awards. I was supposed to like be working regionally, if not in New York, right? Or in LA, like all these things that I have not done, right? And I had to, like, rethink what that success looked like. I was like, oh, I think I did it. And some of that was about, like, realizing that obviously, like, that sort of excitement feeling of being on stage, it's a little different for designers than it is for performers. But that feeling of, like, oh, I've hit the big time, was like, no, it's actually fine that, like, I have just been consistently working at what I love to do for a long time. And that may, like, shift at different times in my life. Like, I'm in the middle of thinking about whether or not I need to shift to something else that I like to do too, which is a whole different topic. And that's going to be weird because I've been working so hard to convince myself that I've succeeded at this for a long time. But I think that's part of that chasing the dragon thing, is, like, chasing what other people have told you success is in this industry. And it might not be what they've told you that it is.
Brian, these are also great.
I'll try to be succinct. When I lived here the first time, I did a kind of cost benefit analysis of acting in theater, which is altogether the best and worst thing I could have done for myself, because acting in theater will never give back what you invest in it, ever. And so for the last, 18 years, I've been kind of the push and pull Lita, right? I went back to school, got my degree in theater, reconnected with theater and with acting, And then for the last 8 years or so have been kind of a shadow artist, if we're going to talk artist way lingo, being close to acting, being in the room with actors and directing them and reading with them, but not involved in it. And the thing that I'm discovering is what I'm coming back to is coming back to first fruits. What's the thing that drew me in the first place? It was theater. And you know what? I don't have to make a ton of money at it. I just want to work with people that I'm excited to be around, and the exchange of ideas, the collaboration between a director and another person on stage and coming alive, like when the lights come up. And, I think it does. It comes and it does. Lita, I think you're right. It does come and go. And I think you're also right. You have to make a decision every day about like, okay, this is what theater means for me today. Tomorrow it might be different, but and to be open with hands open, that's instead of holding on so tightly to something you thought you should be doing, yeah, that's my answer. I'm sticking to it.
It's awesome. Yeah, Hank, I don't think you can get it out of your system. I think figuring out as you mature as an artist, what brings you that joy, and just riding that wave of how it changes. Like if it's someone else's dragon, it'll feel like that. It'll bring you misery. It'll not feel as good as if you make it your own, and to continue to see how that transforms in you. That's all the time we got, you guys. I really do want to thank you, Darren, Emily, Lita, and Brian for joining us tonight. Kyle, thank you for making this whole thing happen, for producing it. officehours.global and DVE Sword, thank you for making this possible for us. Thank You 5 is made possible by Strawdog Theater Company Ensemble members. Strawdog is run on a free theater model where productions are available to anyone and everyone. We can only do this with the generous donations of you guys, our community. You can find more information about that at strawdog.org. If you want to be a panelist, like these lovely people that we've had here tonight, you can also find out how to do that, or invite someone to be a part of this panelist at strawdog.org. We want to just continue to keep this conversation going as we try to figure it out together. We were talking about that. You get a community to figure that shit out. And we want to do that. We invite you guys to do that. So visit us at strawdog.org. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next week. Hooray.